That becomes a big question as we pursue it. So that is their approach, may not be my approach. They will not give that approach up any more than Americans would give up the Constitution, let's say, or their freedom of speech up. So we just have to understand it's like a religion. You know, as we have different religions all around the world, they're deeply held beliefs, and each believes in that they're going to get the right outcomes by pursuing them. And what do you do about that?
There's also the question of human rights. And clearly, the Chinese have a different view than a lot of people around the world. How do you approach that?
Well, there's me and there's every one of us. It's a cosmic question. Every one of us who buys products, or all the businesses that are operating and interacting with China, or operating in many countries, I could list a number of countries, the interconnectedness of the relationships with China. We import 22% of our manufactured goods comes from China. If you're buying your Apple or you're buying your sneakers, you're in a position that's somewhat similar to me in terms of thinking about what the issues are. What I do is I rely on the guidance of the government, both governments. I think in studying their dynasties, I studied the Tang dynasty, which is around 600, and I studied also other societies. It is the things that I've talked about before. It is in broad-based education. That Confucian system was the first meritocracy that came in to create broad-based education, and then they would have exams, and the people who would get the jobs would be the people who were the most capable, and they got away from corruption and those types of things. I wouldn't characterize some things as Chinese. I think that in the history of China, there have been good dynasties and there have been bad dynasties, but there's always the common ingredients of what makes a country successful, and they've been that way uniquely. If you do look at the history, I've studied the powers and the different strengths. China has hit through history up until around 1840, been always like number one or two in the country because of hard work, because of meritocracy, because of being highly civilized. In other words, they are working in the same direction and they operate well to be productive together. Those are the same elements, but it's not just Chinese. If you go back to many empires and many civilizations, those elements have been the timeless and universal elements that have been the source of success. But of course, there's always a balance between being a revolutionary. It's always how far do you take it? So in China right now, there's entrepreneurship, investing in all the ways, empowering, and it's really a capitalist type of approach among entrepreneurship, but they'll call it state capitalism, that kind of an approach. And then there's the question of order. So it is always in getting that balance correctly, because you can have disorder. Like in the United States, we could have enough disorder that could be disruptive to that process. So it's always the issue of getting that balance right. Right now, I think the tilt in China has been a bit more autocratic. And so they're trying to strike this balance with also creating what they call Little Giants program for entrepreneurship and so on. I think it's become too much that way. And I think just in the United States, we're becoming a little disorderly.
Is there any dissent in China?
Oh, dissent. There's not the same kind of open dissent as there is in the United States in terms of how people can speak as freely, nor the media speaking freely, or even listening to things. No. Dissent is more under the surface, particularly now. The leadership evolved greatly also by the circumstances. When he first came to power about 9 years ago, there were two big issues: corruption. And that the system, 5 major banks lent to state-owned enterprises and local governments, and there was no capital market for small, medium-sized businesses and entrepreneurship. And so if you take on the progress they made tremendous progress along those lines. They now have capital markets, and they've done a tremendous job of reducing.
In a country which is ruled by the Communist Party.
Right. But in their way of doing it, which is that it's run like a company, sort of. There's a board and they operate that way.